and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jacqueline Durakis, and I'm the Expeditions Manager for EarthEcho International. We are so excited to have classrooms from all over the globe joining us today as we learn about freshwater, clean energy, and manatees. This live event is part of our Expeditions program. EarthEcho Expeditions are engaging online modules with videos, STEM design challenges, lesson plans, and more. Visit our website after this event to access free resources for teachers and students from our expeditions, including Water by Design, which is a look into engineering freshwater for the future. Just a reminder that you can send in questions anytime via chat today for our hosts, and we will break throughout today's presentation to answer your questions. Feel free to start typing questions in the chat space or on YouTube or in the Zoom feed. We'll be sure to answer those as we go along. And now we'd like to get started with today's live event. Please join me in welcoming our special guests and hosts for today's virtual field trip. We have Lee Eldridge, Environmental Services Manager with NextEra Energy, which includes Florida Power and Light, also known as FPL, and Rachel Schenker, Manatee Master with Manatee Lagoon and FPL Eco-Discovery Center, live from Riviera Beach, Florida. Jody will get us started, so take it away, Jody.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Jacqueline. So happy to be here. So happy that all of you guys are here joining us today to learn a little bit more about manatees and power plants and how they interact with one another. As Jacqueline said, my name is Jody Eldridge, and I am the Environmental Services Manager over here at NextEra Energy. And just a little bit on NextEra Energy, we are the largest utility in the world, which means that we generate electricity and we transport that electricity, which is really important for all of us to get that. So here at NextEra, I manage a team of 6 biologists that oversee all of our development, construction, and operational projects across the US and Canada. And by that, we mean our different facilities are solar and wind. We've got nuclear facilities as well as natural gas facilities, which we'll talk a little bit more about today. So here in Florida, where we're located today, I have a team that supports Florida Power and Light Company, which is also known as FPL, which you'll hear several times throughout this presentation today. And one of our values here is to do the right thing for the environment, which includes protecting habitat and the animals that live in it. So here in Florida, we have several wildlife programs, a sea turtle program, we have a crocodile program, as you can see pictures in the presentation here. But today, Rachel Schenker and I are really going to touch on our manatee program and really explain why it's important that businesses like FPL are good stewards of the environment and share with you kind of how you personally can protect the manatee and the habitat. So for the last 30 years, FPL has worked with several different federal and state agencies as well as nonprofits here in Florida in order to protect manatees that come and visit us at our power plants. Over those years, we've conducted hundreds of aerial surveys, which we fly over certain areas in order to count the manatees that are at the plants. We've published and distributed more than 10,000 of brochures that have educational information about manatees. And we've also done extensive research on manatee habitat and manatees themselves and their behavior. And one of the things that we're most proud of that has recently gone on with the work that we've been doing is that we've built and now operate Manatee Lagoon, which is an FPL Eco-Discovery Center, and it is located on the border of Riviera Beach and West Palm Beach, Florida. And really that facility was created in order to educate the public on manatees and the habitat of Lake Worth Lagoon, which is that water body right outside the building. But before we go to learn a little bit more about Manatee Lagoon, let's go back to where it actually started and talk about the power plant that sits next to Manatee Lagoon. So in 1945, FPL broke ground for the Riviera Beach power plant, and we actually completed the construction back in 1947. And when that power plant came out, in some of the newsletters that were sent out by the company, it was said that half of the electricity that was produced by that plant would actually power up the whole county of Palm Beach County, which is where we are located here today. And in that operations, they used 550,000 barrels of oil per year in order to operate that facility. So over the next few decades, Florida's population grew, as we know, and with that, we needed to grow the Riviera Beach power plant. And so by the 1960s, the plant was producing more than 30 times the electricity that was coming from the original plant. And by the 2000s, we were using millions of gallons of oil per year. And at that point, FPL was starting to have a cleaner vision for our future, and that was emerging, which led us to this next slide here. In 2011, we decided to demolish the old Riviera Beach power plant. Here's a video of that plant coming down here. And so by demolishing this power plant, that made way for FPL to construct a new plant that would be powered by US produced natural gas instead of the fuel oil. And this resulted in carbon emissions that were reduced by 50% and a third less fuel being used for that plant. So between the fuel being reduced and the carbon emissions being reduced, that was a huge win for the environment on that project. But in addition to that, we also really took the environment into consideration when we worked with the Manatees during that demolition and construction. So before the demo, you can see this power plant in the back left. This is the old Riviera Beach power plant before it was demolished. And it was well known that manatees would come to power plants all around Florida for warm water discharges. And so this is a picture of Riviera Beach power plant where you can probably see about 100 or so manatees waiting outside the door for the warm water. And scientists documented that manatees actually adapted their migration and started stopping at these power plants. Historically, they would swim further south or they would use natural springs, but unfortunately, the access to those springs or the water levels, they weren't able to actually access them anymore. So they became used to coming to power plants. And just a tidbit that everyone should know, when the water temperatures drop to 68 degrees or below, manatees can actually get sick. And so it's essential that they have warm water habitat in order to survive. And if they do get sick, they kind of come down with what can be similar to what humans have, which is hypothermia. It's too cold for them. And so they start to have their bodies wear down. In this photo, you see a manatee that was actually rescued from the Riviera Beach power plant before the demolition. And on this day, when we have hundreds of manatees that are located outside of our power plant, it's actually a good time for us to take a good look at the population there and see if there's any manatees that are having any issues. And this manatee on that day had an issue with one of its lungs, and so its buoyancy was off, and so it wasn't quite swimming correctly in the water column. And so we worked with the agencies in order to remove this manatee and was able to take it to rehab, and it was later released. But that's just a great way for us to assess the manatees and be able to help them out if need be. So in this next slide, you can see that since we knew that the manatees were coming to Riviera Beach power plant, when we knew that we were going to be demolishing it and there was going to be a time of construction, we knew that there wasn't going to be warm water produced by the plant. So at that point, we needed to put our heads together with the agencies to figure out what were we going to do in order to protect these manatees. And so we decided to put in these heaters, which is the top left photo, and we were able to keep the manatees warm during the winter. The bottom right photo is actually a photo of the manatees that were located there when the heaters were operating. And as you can see, it worked out pretty well. And so we later then installed heaters at other facilities that had modernizations, and it's currently at the Dania Beach Energy Center, where manatees are also located. Just one little tidbit on why there's warm water that comes out of power plants. I just kind of want to speak to that for a second. So pretty much in order to produce power, we need to have a fuel source that'll heat up some water. That water becomes steam, and then the steam is used to turn the turbine in the power plant, and then it becomes electricity. So in order to make that steam become water again, we need another source of water, which is actually the Manatee Lagoon, which is the water where the manatees are in. And basically it cycles through the plant and takes the heat out of the steam, and then that water is then released back into the lagoon at a higher temperature. So that's why it's important that we're releasing that water for these manatees that need it during the wintertime. So just a little bit of information on kind of why we protect manatees. So in the US, manatees are protected under two federal laws. The first is the Manatee Protection Act of 1972, and the second is the Endangered Species Act of 1973. We also have a law here in Florida, which is state law, called the Florida Manatee Sanctuary Act of 1978. The great news is that in 2017, the West Indian manatee, which the Florida manatee is a subspecies of, was actually downlisted from endangered to threatened, which means the population was growing and the manatees are doing much better than they were decades ago. This was a huge win for the species. And this was due to a lot of efforts done by all the different stakeholders that are interested in manatee protection, by improving habitat and by actually bolstering protections for the manatees. And with these protections remaining and with additional education and awareness, success looks good for these manatees. So with education and awareness in mind, FPL wanted to do our part in providing access to viewing the manatees and learning more about them. So we actually were required by permit to allow access to the public to come check out manatees at our Riviera Beach plant. But we wanted to take it actually a step further and build Manatee Lagoon and Eco-Discovery Center. And it's actually on the next slide there. You can see the photo of the building and the construction going on. And so I was part of a team that really put this all together, from what the building was going to look like to what the exhibits were going to look like, down to actually which photo we were putting in the exhibit. And I will say I've been at NextEra Energy for 12 years, and this was one of the best projects by far that I was a part of. It was really great. It was rewarding. And to be honest with you, I just know that for decades to come, by having this building there and the staff that works there, we're going to continue to inspire folks to protect this species for decades. And I'm really, really proud of that. So similar to 1945, when we opened the doors of our first Riviera Beach power plant, we also did the same similar thing in 2016 when we opened the doors to Manatee Lagoon. And you can see in this photo here, we had local mayors, we had FPL executives, and we had community partners there for that day. And it was a joyous day for all of us to really be able to provide this opportunity to our community. And the mission of the center is to educate the public about manatees and Lake Worth Lagoon, and inspiring communities to preserve and protect Florida's environment and wildlife for future generations. And man, that gives me goosebumps to even think about it. So this mission highlights the role that we all play in conservation. And here at FPL, from our day-to-day decisions to planning for the future, the environment plays a major role in how we make those decisions. So as we move forward with renewables in our FPL fleet and things change, laws change, we need to actually consider what happens if the power plants go away, or if that warm water is no longer allowed to be discharged. What are we going to do in order to protect these manatees? And that's a question that I'm working on right now. The agencies are working on right now. And actually, for those of you that are sitting in the audience here today, you never know, you may be helping me solve this issue here in 10, 15 years yourselves. So, but it's something that we think about a lot. And really, this picture here, which is the last picture of my portion of the slides, is really a great representation of how we partner with different agencies and nonprofits to do the work that we do. And here, this is actually at our Port Everglades plant. We tagged manatees for that project, which meant we put the tag right on their tail. And we were able to follow these manatees to see where they went during the winter, where were they going for warm water, where were they feeding, and it gave us a lot of great data to use when we move forward when making management decisions. But in this photo, it's just a representation of all of our great partners that we work with. And Kristen Eaton is actually one of the girls in the hat right next to the manatee on the right in the blue, and she's part of my staff. She runs the manatee program here. And next to her is Rachel Shanker, who we're going to hear from here shortly. But before we do that, I think we are going to take some questions.
Great, thank you so much, Jody. Lovely presentation. So yes, we are going to do some questions, but first I would like to introduce another young woman who is on the event with us today, and that is Haley. Haley is part of our Youth Leadership Council, and she's currently in school studying ecology. She's actually studying abroad in Canada and is originally from Australia. So I'm going to pass it over to Haley, who's going to lead our questions and answers.
Hi everyone, nice to see all of you. So I'm just going to check in with all the classrooms to see if anybody has any questions. So I think first we'll go to Mrs. Reed's classroom. Do you guys have any questions? I can see lots of hands up. We might need to turn the mute off.
While they're figuring out their mute, do you want to go to the next one and we'll come back to you guys? Don't worry.
No,
Oh, there they go.
they don't have any questions right now. Anybody? No? Okay, no questions.
No worries. And so we might go to Mrs. Stevens' classroom. Do you have any questions?
Hello. Did you have a question? Or, sorry, Alexis, do you have a question? Okay. We have a question. Go ahead, Alexis. In case you can't hear her, she asked if it's complicated to try to keep the water at that consistent temperature for the manatees.
Yeah, so that actually is a really great question. So when the power plant is running, we are always adding heat to the water, but the issue comes when the water temperatures drop extremely. There's only a certain delta, that a change in temperature that we can do. So if the water is insanely cold, like if it's in the 50s, we may not be able to get it up to that 68-degree temperature. So that's kind of what it's based on. It's what the water coming in is what then the water going out is usually somewhere between 10 to 14 degrees higher. So we are producing the same amount, but it's just whether or not the ambient temperature coming in is changing.
Anyone
Great
else?
question though.
Do you have another? At least Alicia has a question.
What other data is collected with the manatees?
She asked what other types of data are collected from the manatees.
Yeah, another great one. So like I said, we do aerial surveys where we fly over the area to count how many manatees there are. We actually, during the tagging effort, which was that last photo where we tagged them, we would do a health assessment. So when we captured the animals, we would take, the agencies that were working with us would take a bunch of samples from the animals to see if they were healthy and all of that. And I'm trying to think if there's one more thing, looking at Rachel over here to see if there's any other data that yeah, with the telemetry, we were able to see where they go, which to be honest with you, one of the coolest things with that project is you can see them hit actually multiple FPL power plants on their migration. And so actually being able to see manatees do that is pretty cool. But yes, between the telemetry and the aerial surveys, that's where a lot of the data is collected for us.
Okay, do we have another?
Yes, we had a student with a question about which animals were manatees related to.
Yeah, so Rachel, do you cover that or no? I don't think so. Yeah, but they are closely related to elephants. Historically, that's kind of where they, were related. But is there any other animals that we?
Looks sort of like a rodent.
The hyrax, which is sort of like a rodent, is what Rachel's saying. So she may highlight that a little bit more in her discussion too. But yeah, actually, so elephants, if you see their fingernails on their trunks, if you've ever been up close to one, manatees actually have that too on their flippers. So that's kind of a cool way of seeing that they historically had been related. Oh, and dugongs, yeah. Any other questions out there?
Yes.
We have one. Akshar, do you want?
Yes, I have a question. Can the water overheat?
Can the water become too warm for the manatees?
No, not really. They would know if it was too hot. They wouldn't be sitting up on it. They would know that. But honestly, they love it as warm as anyone can make it. To them, that's kind of their sweet spot. So we're also not providing water at some insane temperatures that would actually like burn them, for example. That's not what's happening. It's again, during the winter time, it's cold enough down here in Florida that temperature change is just really what they love.
Perfect. So I think we might quickly jump across to Mrs. Morman's classroom as well to see if they have any questions.
Why are they so big?
That's such a great question. And I think Rachel is actually going to talk about that. She's going to talk through about how big they can get and some more details on the manatee. So I don't want to steal her thunder. So I'm going to let her answer that in a little bit.
Why are manatees called sea cows?
Cows of the sea. Because they're actually herbivores. So they get so large because they actually feed on seagrasses and other plants that are within the water, sometimes grass outside of the water. But yeah, so they're large herbivores. And so that's why we call them sea cows.
Fantastic questions, guys. We may need to move on just to keep to time, but our next speaker may be able to answer more of your manatee related questions. So take it away.
Right. Thank you, Haley. Thank you, Jacqueline. And thank you, Jody, and everyone else for joining us here today. My name is Rachel Schenker, and I'm a Manatee Master at Manatee Lagoon. Manatee Lagoon has a team of about 12 Manatee Masters like myself, who are all students at Florida Atlantic University. Whether undergraduate, master's, or PhD students, we're trained to know all about manatees, and we serve as the center's educators, leading tours and other programming. At the center, we welcome about 150,000 visitors each year. Our goal is to inspire those visitors to help them gain a greater appreciation of manatees, including why we should care about them and what we can do to protect them. To spark interest in manatees, we often share intriguing facts about them. For example, do you know how much a manatee eats? Take a moment and think about it and make a guess about how much you think the typical manatee eats in one day. Well, manatees consume approximately 10% of their body weight every single day. So for an average manatee that weighs a little over 1,000 pounds, that means they're going to be eating about 100 pounds of vegetation every single day, or similar to the weight of some middle schoolers, such as some of you out there. And that's one of the reasons they do get so big, as Jody mentioned earlier. So you might think that all that food contributes to a manatee's large size, or that manatees are fat. It's a very common misconception that manatees have a lot of body fat, and that's why they're so big. However, manatees aren't really fat in relative to their body size. Their digestive tract, including about 140 feet of intestines in the average adult, contributes to their overall size. The large digestive system helps them efficiently process all that vegetation that they eat, such as seagrasses, that may be low in nutrients. Manatees don't have sufficient blubber to help them stay warm in the same way that thick layers of blubber help many whales and dolphins live in cold waters. Without that insulation, manatees must seek out warm water when it gets cold, much like what Jody mentioned earlier. As Jody described earlier, when temperatures do drop, manatees gather in the clean, warm water outflow of the plant next to our center. Our team members never tire of seeing the manatees, and we love sharing that experience with others. From our observation deck, we see manatees swimming or resting in the nearby waters. If surrounding waters are well above 68 degrees, manatees might not be seen, as they do not need to come to Manatee Lagoon to stay warm if they're already warm enough in those surrounding waters. Instead, they may spend their time elsewhere searching for and eating their favorite foods. When temperatures drop, many manatees may hunker down to stay at the warm water near the center. The highest count documented in the Riviera Beach plant's outflow was over 500 manatees. Today, our team didn't count any manatees over at Manatee Lagoon because the surrounding water temperature was about 75 degrees. So remember, this water temperature influences how many manatees are going to be at our center. The colder it is and the closer that water temperature is to 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the more likely we are to see a high number of manatees. So since it's fairly warm there today, we didn't see any come through yet. You can check to see if manatees are present at Manatee Lagoon by visiting our online manatee cam at visitmanateelagoon.com/manatee-cam. This camera is a 24-hour live stream, so we implore you to take a look at it and see if there are any manatees out there when you look. Manatee Lagoon is one of several warm water locations in Florida, including several power plants where manatees may gather. This map on the right here shows some of those power plants throughout Florida. If you're tuning in from somewhere in Florida, you may have heard of manatee season before. In Florida, this season runs from November 15th to March 31st, when manatees migrate to the state and the southernmost portions of the state and are more likely to gather at these warm water sites, such as Manatee Lagoon, which you can see on the left photo on this slide. Seasonal speed zones and other protections also go into effect on Florida's waterways during this season to help protect these vulnerable animals. In addition to protecting manatees from human-related threats, such as entanglements and watercraft strikes, maintaining access to these warm water sites is an important factor for protecting this threatened species. Manatees are an important part of a healthy ecosystem in Florida. As with any system, a change in one component can have an impact on other components, disrupting an important balance. We can all play a role in nurturing nature and helping to maintain a healthy environment, whether for our manatees or for any other living things. You can make a difference every day when you make sure your waste and your trash ends up where it belongs. You may also choose to create less waste and recycle or reuse whenever you can. You can learn more about manatees, maybe come to Manatee Lagoon for a visit, and share what you learn with others so they too can be part of the conversation and conservation of these amazing creatures. If you go boating where manatees are found, learn the steps you can take, such as posting a lookout and slowing down to help keep them safe. While industry can nurture nature, we can all do our part to protect manatees and the environment. Back to you, Jacqueline.
Great, thank you so much, Rachel. We're actually going to see who's going to handle some of the questions. We have quite a few questions, so if you could hang out and answer them, that would be lovely.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, we've been getting heaps of questions through chat. Thanks for sending those through. So the first one, Monica asks, what are the organisms all over the manatee's body? The items were circular.
That's a wonderful question. So manatees are generally slow moving, which means it's pretty easy for different organisms to grow on top of them, especially around their backs. So a lot of the times, if you're looking at manatees, you'll see they look kind of brown or green on the top. That's a lot of algae, those plant-like organisms that grow on their backs. And those circular ones that you mentioned are barnacles. So they're so slow moving most of the time that a lot of them can get barnacles growing along their body surface. Also, some things don't necessarily grow on them, but if you see a lot of strange markings on a manatee's back, they could be scars from boats. So a lot of manatees, over 80% of adult manatees, are going to have some form of boat scar on their backs or sides, or even on their undersides. So that could be another form of marking that you're seeing on those manatees.
Awesome. The next question is, when do manatees leave the power plant?
That's a good question. So it is based on the temperature. So manatee season, remember, runs from November 15th to March 31st. However, once the surrounding waters in that Lake Worth Lagoon get warm, the manatees don't need to stay in our warm water outflow, and they'd rather go out and feed. So this time of year, as with today, we didn't see any. So there's still maybe some in the Lake Worth Lagoon in the surrounding waterways, but we may not necessarily see them in our outflow at Manatee Lagoon because it's warm enough for them to travel elsewhere.
Awesome. Someone else asks, can manatees live out of the water?
That's a good question as well. I love all these questions. So manatees do not naturally live out of the water. You wouldn't find a manatee up on the shore. They're not like seals or sea lions. They don't have the body rotation to be able to go out of the water. The only time you would see them out of the water surviving is when they're rescued. So you may have seen a few photos during Jody's portion of the presentation of manatees up on the shore. And that's because they're being captured in order to be traveled or taken to another area and rehabilitated. So they can survive out of the water during that travel time, but you would not naturally find them outside of the water.
Awesome. The next question is, does global warming affect the manatee migration?
Definitely does. So remember, they're coming to these warm water sites to stay warm. And if the waters are getting warmer, they may not need to travel as far south to find that warm water. However, keep in mind all the side effects to these warming waters. So you may think the manatees are happier with a lot of that warm water going around and being much warmer much more of the time. But a lot of their food sources can't survive those high temperatures. So we're losing a lot of our seagrasses, which is their main food source, due to a lot of these environmental changes that are occurring.
Awesome. So we've got time for, I think, another 5. So are other animals found here specifically for the warm water?
We do see lots of fish. I wouldn't necessarily say they're there just for the warm water, but we do know that snook are one fish that love warm water, and we do see them in our lagoon. We also see a lot of other wildlife at Manatee Lagoon, even in the summer, even when we don't see manatees. We have lots of barracuda every day, lots of tarpon, those big silverfish that fishermen love to catch. We see parrotfish, angelfish, and sometimes we even get to see sea turtles coming through the area.
That's really awesome. Another question is, why do manatees need warm water to survive?
That's a great question. So manatees, remember, it's a common misconception that they have a lot of body fat and a lot of blubber like whales or seals or sea lions do to keep them warm in cold waters. Manatees have very little body fat, which means they have very little insulation in order to allow them to maintain their body temperature more easily. They also have a really slow metabolism, which means it's harder for them to generate their own body heat. Since they are mammals, they are warm-blooded. But just like when you get cold, you need to put on a jacket, when manatees get cold, they need to come to warm water in order to stay warm.
And we have another question coming in. How do manatees communicate with each other?
Oh, that's great. Manatees do communicate through vocalizations. So even though they're really large, growing on average about 10 feet long, they're very high frequency, high pitched calls to each other. They sound almost like a squeaking mouse. So they will vocalize underwater.
Great. And what did manatees do before the power plants released warm water?
Before the power plants released warm water, the manatees would either just swim south. So if any of you are coming in or tuning in from South Florida, down in the Keys, down in Miami, you'll know that it's not very common for the water to dip too cold for too long. So they can just swim south to warmer waters, or more commonly, they'll go into the springs. So Florida has a lot of natural freshwater springs where that water is coming up from underground in our system of aquifers and these water-filled caves under the ground. And since that water is coming from underground, it's not affected by the environmental factors like the sun or the air temperature. So it's going to be a nice warm temperature all year round, even in the winter, for those manatees to go to. So a lot of the times, or before these power plants were here, they'd come to springs or just swim to more shallow southern warm water sites.
Fabulous, thank you so much. So we're just going to do a couple more questions. What are the main predators of manatees? Do they have any natural predators? And if so, how do they protect themselves?
It's one of my favorite questions because it's such a happy answer. Manatees do not have any natural predators, really. So they do come in contact with alligators in the springs and sharks when they're in the intracoastal and the ocean and that salt water. However, mostly just because of their big size. Remember, the average adult manatee is going to be about 10 feet long. So nothing really wants to mess with them. They're just too large. So even those calves, which are much smaller, when they're born, they're about 4 feet long and they've got mom to protect them. So they will come in contact with some typical predators, but those predators don't really go after the manatees. And there's one manatee in Blue Springs State Park who's been named Gator because he loves to chase the alligators within the springs. So that's a perfect example of how even those big alligators don't want to mess with the manatees. They all get along pretty well. The only threats to manatees that are really prevalent today are going to be people. So boats are a big threat. If you're lucky enough to be out there on a boat, make sure you slow down because those scars and those boat impacts can really hurt the manatees. And just people urbanizing a lot of areas and reducing their warm water sites is also a big threat. So they don't have any natural predators, but people can always do better to try and help protect them as well.
For sure. Do you know approximately how many manatees we have here in Florida?
There are over 6,000 manatees as of the last count in Florida. Jody, do you know if there was an update this year of how many? They do aerial surveys and count every year, but manatee season isn't over here in 2020 just yet, so we may not have a final count for 2020.
Great. And kind of along those lines, what is the lifespan of an average manatee?
The average manatee rarely lives past about 30 years just because of all those threats out there. However, we know they can live a lot longer. There have been tagged manatees, and you can identify a manatee based on their scarring. So they may see a manatee with certain scars and then see it again in previous or future years. And so they know that manatees can live to be over 60 years old. And in fact, there was one manatee named Snooty who was born in captivity in Florida around Bradenton. And he lived to be almost 70 years old. So we know they can live for a very long time, just as one of their closest living relatives, the elephants, can also live for a very long time.
Excellent. So the last questions I'm going to kind of wrap up into one big question, if that's okay with you, Rachel. And that is, can you explain to us a little bit about what manatees eat in the water? Is there anything from the power plant that could potentially impact the manatees' food sources, whether it's positive or negative? And then can you also talk a little bit about how are they so well adapted to go in freshwater, brackish, and the ocean?
Yeah, absolutely. So manatees, they eat vegetation. They're herbivores. So their favorite food source is going to be seagrass because it's one of the most prevalent things in their habitat, but they will venture out to other areas in the springs, especially. They'll eat a lot of other aquatic vegetation. And at Manatee Lagoon, we have a beachy area towards our south where we used to have some trees that during high tide, the leaves kind of overhang the water, and we'd see manatees lifting their snouts out of the water to nibble the leaves right off those trees. They'll also swim through canals to find warm water or fresh water. And you can see them, there's pictures out there of them kind of mowing the lawns of the backyards of those folks who live there, because they will eat just about any vegetation that they can find. As for the power plant, nothing that gets put out of the power plant is really going to affect their food source. So the only thing that's happening to that water is a change in temperature. And it does dissipate fairly quickly once you pass our outflow area. So it's not changing the temperature of the Lake Worth Lagoon itself enough to really do anything to their food source.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. And then last question we're going to answer today is, can you talk a little bit about manatee behavior? You know, sometimes we think that they're these slow things and they get hit by boats, but they're not always slow. So can you talk a little bit about that? And also, how can you interact with a manatee? Is it okay to pet a manatee if you see one? How do we handle that?
Yeah, so manatees generally move a little bit faster than we walk at an average pace. But if you do scare a manatee, if it needs to get away quickly, they can move pretty quickly in short bursts, kind of like a person sprinting, up to 20 miles an hour. So they can move fairly quickly. However, they'd have to know that a boat is coming, they'd have to see it, they'd have to hear it. And it's not always the case where they can get out of the way in time, even though they can move fast if they need to. In terms of interacting with manatees, the best thing you can do is just observe and enjoy them. So you don't want to interact with them in the water. You definitely don't want to give them any food. That's a big no, because we don't want them to become any more dependent on people than they already are. So when you are lucky enough to see one, just take a step back, watch it, learn to love it, enjoy it, but definitely leave them alone. So if you are in the water and a manatee does swim up to you, they may be curious and they may come up, but remember to just kind of back away slowly and give it its space, just like you would with any other wild animal.
Great. All right, last two questions, I promise. And these are for Mrs. Reed's class. And they would like to know, what would happen if there were no more power plants? What would happen with the manatees? And also, Rachel, do you ever get bored of manatees?
I'm going to answer that second one first, because absolutely not. I've been at Manatee Lagoon since we opened 4 years ago, and I still squeal every time we get to see manatees. The first ones that come in the winter, we all get excited. We come over the radios to announce our first manatees, and everyone will go outside to see them. We never get tired of seeing manatees here. As for that first question, what happens to the manatees if there are no power plants? I'm actually going to pass that back over to Jody, because she did mention that a little bit during her portion, and she has a little bit more expertise in that area than I do.
Yeah, so big question, and it's actually something that we are actively working on with the agencies. They're actually going to be coming out with a warm water action plan, which means all of the stakeholders are going to be coming together to discuss what actually happens when the power plants go away and where will the manatees go. And hopefully the population at that point continues to grow as time goes on. But There's a lot of questions about kind of what do we do? Do we help to train manatees to do something else? Do we put something in at where the power plants are to kind of continue that warm water moving forward? I think there's a lot of ideas of what we could do potentially moving forward, but there's no answer yet. So I think we're all kind of working on that in real time.
Awesome. Well, thank you both, Jody and Rachel. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you guys. And I would like to encourage everyone to go online and follow the Manatees and Manatee Lagoon, so you can see all of their social information there. And don't forget to check out that live Manatee cam that is streaming 24/7. And we'd also like you to connect with our partner scientists in every Florida school. It's a University of Florida Thompson Earth Systems Institute program, and it's a free program connecting Florida teachers to scientists for virtual and physical visits in the classroom. You can request a scientist on the How to Get Involved page on their website, join the Teacher Scientist Forum via Facebook or Twitter, or email Stephanie Killingsworth, the coordinator, for more information. EarthEcho International and I would like to join you for all of our invite you to join us for all of our exciting programs. Our Expeditions program is an annual program that leverages the rich Cousteau legacy of exploration and discovery to bring STEM education content alive for today's century learners and their educators. You can explore our newest expedition, What's the Catch? All about sustainable fisheries at earthecho.org. Did you know that you can become a citizen scientist with EarthEcho's Water Challenge program? The EarthEcho Water Challenge builds public awareness and involvement in protecting water resources around the world by engaging citizens to conduct basic monitoring of their local water bodies. Visit our website to learn more. We also love to highlight relatable voices and exciting life experiences to make careers in science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM, come alive. With STEM Explore, we strive to connect students to STEM professionals to serve as positive role models and inspiration for the next generation of STEM explorers with videos and live virtual career connections throughout the year. And again, you can join the conversation at our website. And lastly, we are excited to announce a brand new program for EarthEcho International.
And it looks like we don't have audio on that, Jacqueline.
Oh, thank you, Casey. Well, what Philippe is telling you, our fearless leader Philippe is telling you in this slide, is that our new program, our Echo Challenge, is for middle school students and their teachers to take a closer look at biodiversity, and then also kind of look at the threats to the local ecosystems, and then propose a solution to help preserve, protect, or repair those natural resources. 10 of the finalist teams will join us in Washington, D.C., where they will present their ideas to restore or protect that local biodiversity. The top 3 teams will be awarded up to $10,000 in grants to turn their projects into a reality. You can visit our website to submit your plan to save the world, and that deadline is March 22nd, 2020. Be sure to stay connected with EarthEcho on our social media channels and our website. And we would also like to say a special thank you to National Biodiversity Teach-In and the students and teachers at Elgin High School for inviting us to be a part of this tremendous event today. On behalf of EarthEcho International and everyone that was a part of this event today, we thank you so much for joining us, and keep exploring. Bye, everyone.
Bye, thank you.
Bye.